If I were given the question, tell me about a project you're proud of, here's the example answer I would give. When I was an engineering manager at my previous company, my team launched a notification service for our web and mobile products. Based on earlier customer research, we believe this feature would increase user retention, which was one of our company's main KPIs. And this was a particularly challenging project due to the technical complexity of the feature, the velocity of the timeline we're aiming for, and the tight collaboration that was required across engineering teams that hadn't really worked previously together. There were a few main components of the project that I can go into. We had to design the backend service and API that would handle fetching and sending notifications, and doing so with minimal latency. We had to implement the storage layer that would handle reading and writing the notifications for each user. And finally, our team also helped build the interface for the product that displayed the feed of notifications, which would highlight the unread notifications and handle deep linking to the correct place within the application. So there were some interesting technical challenges to all of these components that I can go into in more depth. In the end, the project was really successful. We shipped the project a week ahead of schedule. The feature had an even greater impact on our key metrics than we were expecting, and customer retention increased by 20%. Now, a follow-up question you might get is, what made this technically complex? And here's an example answer you can use to follow up on that. There were a number of complex parts of the project, but scalability and performance were the most challenging, in my opinion. The notification feature would be used across multiple platforms on the application, so there could be millions of active users for this feature. And our engineers had to really think about scalability from the beginning. In particular, we had to handle a really high volume of API requests and optimize the response latency to make sure users had a good experience in our app. And to understand the load requirements more, we had to calculate estimates based on historical data and project the number of active devices, which came out to around 300 queries per second. Since that's on the higher end, I asked our tech lead to talk with our infrastructure team. We tried to understand if there would be any risks of overwhelming our downstream services or exceeding our capacity. And based on their feedback, we determined the volume of read queries would be so high that it might be more than our databases could handle. So we decided to add a caching layer to mitigate those concerns. Things weren't quite that simple, though, and we knew our database would be overwhelmed if we used it to serve every request. But at the same time, our in-memory caching service didn't have the space to handle everything either. In the end, our team had to make some trade-offs where new notifications would be served from the cache, while older notifications would be handled by the database. So to manage space, we used a least recently used cache policy so that older notifications would be replaced by newer ones as needed. Since notifications are typically read soon after being created, we also used a write-through caching to ensure the initial read could be served from the cache rather than the database. Now, you might get asked a question along the lines of, how did you set up your team for success? And if I were given that question, I would answer it like this. It's important to me that my team succeed both in terms of execution and the personal growth of the people on my team. So at the start of this project, I chose a senior team member who'd previously expressed interest in having more opportunities for leadership. And I thought this project would be a particularly good growth opportunity for her based on her skill set and her interests. So I asked her to be the tech lead for this project. I also set aside some extra time for us to talk about what success means and set expectations around the outcomes of the project. From a process perspective, I'm especially proud of the way we brought together multiple teams to solve problems. Since the engineering work spanned across several different platform teams, I felt it was important to sort of tighten the feedback loop with a process for regular communication. So I set up regular weekly syncs to review progress with the whole team, and our tech lead also ran daily stand-ups to keep everyone on the same page. These meetings ended up being really critical to the success of our project because we were able to identify dependencies earlier on and parallelize our team's work instead of waiting for each engineer to complete their part of the project. In order to make sure our team had the resources and focus needed to complete the project, I also created a process for prioritizing inbound requests from other teams. This prevented a lot of the thrash and interruptions caused by non-urgent requests, which saved us several hours per week. Now, sometimes you might be asked about conflicts that arose during a project. So here's an example for this project. There weren't many conflicts within the team, but there was one issue we faced with a partner team. This team owned one of the core database models that we needed to modify in order to implement our feature. And although someone on their team had greenlit our proposed modifications during the planning process, Later during the actual code review process, a senior engineer on the other team brought up additional concerns that could add significant work and risk delaying our team's project. So in order to come to an agreement, we set up some time to discuss the set of possible solutions, understand the other team's priorities, and try to facilitate a solution that worked for everyone. In the end, we did find a compromise where we would ship our initial changes to unblock the rest of the project and then iterate to a solution that addressed their main concerns at a later date. So one lesson learned here, though, is that we should have spoken to all of the relevant stakeholders earlier in the review process. The interviewer might also ask you about the outcome of the project. They might phrase this as, what was the outcome, or what was the impact of the project on the company? Here's an example answer. In terms of the business impact, the project beat our expectations. The overall effect was a nearly 20% increase in user retention following the launch of the project. We were able to attribute most of this impact directly to notifications with the help of our data analysis team. The project also had a big impact on our team. I felt it was great that it brought everyone together and it sort of leveled up the whole organization. Our engineers gained a lot of visibility for their work, and several of them were promoted in the following performance cycle, owing in large part to their contributions during this project.